excited and I'm now ready to show you how to manage user roles and permissions in your application. And in this case, what you can see here is the roles and privileges dashboard for an enterprise application. I created this for this tutorial. So the users you select, you can actually just see the roles and privileges assigned to them, and you can go on to assign more roles. You can actually remove more additional roles. So let's take, for instance, I want to assign David Jones sales manager, or you can actually go ahead to assign all the roles, all the privileges under that role. So click on assign all, and it assigns David Jones all the privileges under sales manager. And I'm simply going to click on save, and it saves it. So if I go back maybe to Sarah Williams, no privileges, and I go back to David Jones, you can see that David Jones have sales manager role, and I can select myself, and this is exactly how it works. So I can go ahead to assign some other ones to James Smith, and then I click on update, and it assigns him those privileges. Now, this is the standard way to handle roles and privileges in an enterprise application, be it Spring Boot application, be it any kind of application. This is a standard fine-grained approach that is used in all enterprise applications out there. There is also the simplified approach that uses only roles, and the privileges are inherited from the roles. I'm going to show you that as well. I implemented that approach in FleetMS version 2, so you can find the link to that tutorial in the description of this video. You can see that the users can be assigned different roles, but the privileges are not specified, because once you assign a user a role in this application, then he inherits automatically all the privileges under that role. So take, for instance, the HR admin role means that this HR admin have all the privileges: add, edit, delete, and update for everything under the HR module. If you look at the HR module of this application, you can see that there's a number of things there. The HR admin have privilege over all these things. Immediately, you assign him that role, HR admin. So the problem here is this is not fine-grained, right? So it means that if you want to assign somebody one or two roles, you have to go ahead, one or two privileges, you have to go ahead to assign him all the privileges under that role. So that is not quite useful when you have an enterprise application where you want a more granular approach. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to implement this method, this standard fine-grained granular approach of handling roles and privileges. And we are going to start immediately to start building our API section of it, because we already in the previous tutorial, we completed building the API for our InventoryMS. And of course, I just kept the Swagger documentation open. So if you missed out that previous tutorial, please go to complete it before you continue, or pause this video and go to complete that tutorial 1, I think tutorial 1, and then you can come back. So let's get started right now. I've created a step-by-step, so not really a step-by-step, but a guide that can make it easy for you to implement roles and privileges in Spring Boot. So now you have roles and privileges 1, roles and privileges 2, the data model and API, roles and privileges 3, implementing granted authorities. I'm going to explain that to you as we go. Okay, so let's go ahead to the first part. But before I continue, I want to mention that these tutorials, I'm making them for free, and I spend a lot of time to make these tutorials. Someone have told me to make a Udemy course for my tutorials, but I really think my subscribers deserve all of this. So if you're out there, please subscribe to my channel. If you are subscribed already, if you want to say thanks, you can click on that thanks button and you can say thanks. I will appreciate it very much. Any other thing you can do to support me in my channel, I will appreciate it greatly, because that helps me a lot to have the motivation, because it takes a lot of effort to make these tutorials for you. Okay, so let's go ahead to get started from where we stopped. From where we stopped, we have So from the previous tutorial, we had our REST API for InventoryMS. As you can see, I've opened it right here. And we created the Swagger documentation. Now there's nothing about permissions here. So now we are going to start creating the roles and privileges data model. So the first tutorial says the first thing you need to do is to understand the roles and privileges for your application. So the first step is, if you are building any kind of application, take some time to enumerate all the roles and enumerate all the privileges for that application, because you will need them. So I'm going to show you how it looks like. The configuration in the back end will look something like this. This is a product, this is the order, this is supplier. This is how the back end will look like. So this is like the completed application, but we are going to be doing it from the scratch. So enumerate everything you need, as you can see here. So admin, inventory manager, sales manager, and so on, enumerate. Also have the super admin, which has overall permission or privilege over everything. So we have the super admin or the super user. We have the inventory admin or the inventory manager. Some use the postfix admin, some use manager. It can be the same. Sales admin has all these roles. Warehouse staff or personnel has all these roles. Procurement admin has these roles. This I'm mixing it up. So have these privileges, right? So procurement admin is a role, but all these other things like create supplier, view supplier, these are privileges. Okay, so once we've done that, we now want to move ahead to do the practical now. So let's go to do the practical. We are going to be creating the data model, and the data model involves 4 different classes. Pay attention to the explanation of this. Now you want to know how these classes map to each other or to one another. In the previous tutorial, in the API we built, we already have user and we already have roles. So take a look at what we have previously. If you have it, you can actually open it as well. So we have user. We have this user object has actually nothing to do with roles. So there's no mapping yet for now. And we have role right here. So we have role. For now, there's no mapping. So the mapping we are going to be creating in this tutorial will look like this. Pay attention to how the relationships work, because we have one-to-many relationships here. Now, if you can avoid using a many-to-many relationship, that will help you a great deal. Because one-to-many, you can handle and manage this relationship the way you want it. But if you use a many-to-many, Hibernate is going to manage parts of this relationship. For instance, creating a new table that you don't know, and also adding a bit of other mappings that is not quite clear, which might actually also lead to infinite recursions and a few other things. So it's better to stick to one-to-many. Now in this setup here, you can actually break many-to-many into 2 one-to-manys, right? Now we have roles and privilege. It's very clear. That is the easy one to understand. A role has many privileges. Easy. One role, many privileges, one-to-many. Now pay attention here that a user has many privileges, right? In some tutorials, they may say a user has roles and roles have privileges. That is fine, but it's a bit confusing. Stick with this approach, and this is the easy approach to understand, and you can implement this approach very easily. Now, a user has a privilege or can have many privileges in this approach I'm using here. And if a user has a privilege, then he can have the role that privilege belongs to. But if a user has a role, then he does not automatically have all the privileges in that role. Very, very important to understand. So we are going to create a one-to-many from role to privilege, one-to-many from role to user, one-to-many from privilege to user privilege assignment. and one-to-many from user to user privilege assignment. User privilege assignment is a way for us to manage the relationship ourselves. If you do a many-to-many, Hibernate is going to create this table, but we want to actually create this table by ourselves and be able to manage this relationship and be able to fetch user privileges or fetch users in the roles, and it's much easier to handle it yourself in this way. So a user have privileges and privileges have roles. This is have a role. Okay, so keep that in mind, and this is the explanation. Take some time to read in my website to understand what I just explained to you. Okay, so let's go ahead with the implementation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create the relationship between user and privilege. Step one, let's create the privilege model. So let's go back to our API. And now, before I continue, I would just like to do one thing. So if you look at our API, you see that it's not versioned. Oh, is version? No. Refresh this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, great. So you have this V1, API V1. I didn't explain it to you. To be able to achieve this, you are going to add something to your application.properties file. If you go to your application.properties file, simply add this server.servlets.context.path, and this is going to be /API/v1. So you can always change the version of your API from here. So because currently this application runs on port 8080, if you look at the Swagger documentation for it, so port 8080/Swagger UI, you see that we don't have any version. So let's correct that. And to do that, simply, sorry, I'm going to take out the React. Simply add this server.servlet.context.path. Once you do that, just go ahead to restart your application, and it's going to pick up the API version. While it is restarting, I'm going to go to security, and in security, we have all the models, all the classes related to security. Inside it, I'm going to kind of create things to make it organized. So in securities directory or securities package, I'm going to create 4 different packages to be able to group things into controller, repository, service, and model. So I'm going to create a package where I'm going to place all my models, and I'm going to create another one to place my repositories. I'm going to create another one to place my services. And finally, I'm going to I created services class, sorry. So I'm creating actually a package I'm going to call services. And finally, the last one will be the controllers. Okay, as we are doing this, let's just go to check. So if we refresh this page, the UI is gone. It will say not able to fetch the dots. So it's actually server.servlet.context-path. Sorry, so this is my mistake. So I'm going to reload the application. Okay, so at this point, if I refresh this page, you can see that our Swagger API now it has a version. It's saying version v1, v3, but actually the version is displayed right here in the address bar, API/v1. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, let's go back to continue building up the data model. So we've created the privilege, we grouped everything into packages. So what you can do, simply drag things across into the correct package. For instance, roles should be in models. So you should make that refactoring yourself. Okay, so let's go ahead to create privilege. And I'm going to, I think we can also make it extends auditable string, so that we have the auditing fields like last updated by, updated time, and last updated time. Okay, so we need the entity annotation, and we also need the data annotation. We need the ID annotation, and we need generated values, and the strategy is going to be generation type.identity, and we have private long ID. Okay. We also need the description, private string description. Okay, so we say that privilege maps to users, right? So we have a one-to-many from user to privileges and a many-to-one from privilege to user. So let's create the one going from privilege to user, which is the many privileges to one user. And this many to one is going to have the join column to be, the join column is going to be the privilege ID, which have to be defined in this class. Take note that I'm not using camel case. I have a reason for that, because I don't want Hibernate to manage this mapping. So if possible, don't use camel case, just use the case in exactly the way I'm using it, because we want to have complete control over all the mappings in the roles and permission functionality. And this is going to be insertable false, updatable false for the field private privilege, okay? Oh, sorry, this is private user. So import class. Okay, so we are saying that we are mapping many to one, many privileges to one user. The join column is the privilege ID, and the privilege ID actually the privilege ID, but the user ID, sorry, it's going to be the user ID. So there is a join column in the other table. So the join column in the user table, that's the user ID. And we now want to create the column, the field that represents the column. So it's going to be long user ID. Okay, so this is basically how you create the mapping from user to privileges. So the next one we want to create is a mapping from role to privileges, right? So mapping from user to privileges. So one role, many privileges, and this also one user, many privileges. So let's copy this, and then we can just replicate it and just change to role ID. And this is going to be private role. And this is going to be role ID. Now there's something called infinite recursion that happens when you have relationship that is bidirectional. So if you have a privilege, for instance, have users, and users have privileges, and those privileges have users, is to create infinite recursion. I'm going to show you how to solve this problem, because we are going to experience it after now. Okay, so we've created the relationship from role to privilege and from user to privilege. Actually, privilege to user and privilege to role. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so we are going to create the other side of the relationship. This other side of the relationship, they are actually optional, but let's create for the role. I think that will be important. So let's do add one role to many privileges, and it's going to be mapped by role. So mapped by role is a field in the one to many side. Sorry, in the many to one side. So if you are going from role to privileges, the role is the one to many side, and the privileges is the many to one side. So there's a many to one side, and this is the field, the mapped by field. So going back here, so that's why we say mapped by role. And here we are going to have list of privileges. So private list of privilege, privileges. The next thing we want to do now, there is this table we must create. The next part of the relationship, which is this table, very, very important. So we are going to create the object that represents this table. So I call it user privilege assignment. So I'm going to create that model here. User privilege assignment. Okay. And also I'm going to add, and we are going to add an entity annotation, data annotation, so to help us handle some boilerplates. I'm going to just copy the ID part because the ID is the same. Now we are creating, let's go back to check. We are creating a one-to-many from privilege to user privilege assignment, right? But many-to-one from user privilege assignment to privilege, and many-to-one from user privilege assignment to user. So you already know how to create a many-to-one. So many-to-one, you can find it here like this. So in this case, we want to create from user privilege assignment to user. So this is a many-to-one, but in this case, we should have the join column is going to be, just 1 second. So it's going to be user ID, right? Because for one user, we can have many privilege assignments, right? Which actually represents privileges. So for one user, we have many privilege, assignments, okay? And the same, we also have many-to-one for the privilege, right? So let's go back to check. Many-to-one from here to user, many-to-one from user privilege assignment to privilege. So let's create the second many-to-one. And in this case, it's going to be privilege ID, and it's going to be privilege, and it's going to be privilege, and here is going to be privilege ID. Right, so it's going to always be the same. Join column has to be created. So now we are going to create the one-to-many part of the relationship. So we are going to go to user. So here in users, we can now fetch, let's see. So you can see that we have this user, we have roles. We are going to remove this user roles here. Actually, it's going to be at one-to-many, and it's going to be mapped by user, right? Because in the user privilege assignment, we have this mapped by, where we are going from user to user privilege assignment. We are going from user to user privilege assignment. We are going from one user to many, right here. And we are going to have a list of user privilege assignments, a list of. So if this is a bit confusing, take some time to pause the video and try to understand what is going on. And what we will return from here, right? What we are going to return from here, the assignment has privilege, a list of privileges. It also has a set of users. So user privilege assignment has fields like ID, user ID, and privilege ID. So if you fetch a set of them, that represents several users, right? Or several privileges. If you are going from privilege to privilege assignment, or from a privilege assignment to the privilege, we are going to be interested in fetching the privileges. But if you are going from user to privilege assignment, or from privilege assignment to user, we are interested in fetching the users, right? But don't worry if you don't get everything. Just implement it exactly the way I'm implementing it, and it's going to be clear as we go. So in case of, where are we? Let's go back to users. So this is where we are. So we are going to have users. So we are going to have users, right? list of privilege assignments want to manage. So sorry, we are going to be having the privileges. Actually, it can be privilege assignment, right? That is the name. But since we will be getting, users will be getting a list of privileges for that user, so we leave it at this. And we do the same thing in the privilege. So we do the same thing in privilege, and here we are mapped by privilege, and here we have users, right? So for privilege, we need the users, right? Which this contains users and privileges. Okay, I think this should be it for all the models. And I think to avoid making this tutorial to be too long, I'm going to simply run this just to make sure we don't have any errors. Then we have to cut the video and then move on to the next part. So let me just run it and we try to correct any exceptions we might have. So I'm going to just restart. Okay, I'm going to take out this and I'm going to just restart. So we have a number of errors. Let's see. So privilege and role incompatible. So let's go to privilege. Role is using integer, I think, so it should use long. Let's run again. Role ID in column. So the problem here is that we already have run this application before now, and it created all these tables prior to this time with the data type integer, I think, but now we are using long. So the safe thing to do is to simply delete the table and allow Hibernate to create the new tables. So first, let's check that Hibernate should be able to create the new tables. In our properties file, we need to ensure that the Spring JPA Hibernate DDL auto is set to update. And now I'm going to open MySQL Workbench and I'm going to go to the database and I'm going to delete the table role and also any other table that has been created before now. The database name is InventoryMS DB. So I should have my MySQL Workbench opening. Let's see. So I'm logging into MySQL and I'm going to go to InventoryMS DB and go to tables and I'm going to delete. You're going to delete this user role. We're going to drop that table. Hope we can. And we're also going to drop a role as well. Okay, so now we have just user remaining, and the user, let me just check the field we have there. Let's see. So user is using long, as you can see, so everything should be fine. Okay, so let's rerun the application and let's see what we have. Okay, so we have a Tomcat started on port 8080, so our setup of the models is perfectly okay. Let's go back to the Swagger UI just to make sure everything still works as expected. And of course, everything should work as expected. Before we round off, I would like to show you one thing that we need to do. So here in user privilege assignment, we need a constructor, but that constructor is one that is going to take the privilege ID and the user ID. So I'm going to create that constructor right now. I'm going to right click and say generate constructor, and I'm going to choose, we need user ID and privilege ID. So we have, if we want to insert a new assignment, we provide the user ID and the privilege we want to assign that user. So we need this constructor. Okay, so let's stop here. And just before we finally round off, I'm going to just check around and make sure everything is fine. So let's look for user privilege assignments here. So let me say assignments. So you can see it right here. User privilege assignment. So we don't have the controllers yet, so that's why we don't have the controllers here, so we can't test them out for now. But let's see what we do in the next part. So I'd like to thank you for viewing. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, like this video, click on thanks to say thanks, and also show some support to my channel, and we'll see you in the next part.